session, please feel free to put them into the Q&A area, and I'll share your questions with Mike. And at the very end, we will open up the line for questions. Questions don't have to be limited to the Baum feeder tips and tricks. You can expand it to other things if you'd like. And besides Mike Granata, we also have Len Christopher from the product team on the phone. So without further delay, Mike, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for the Baum feeder tips and tricks.
Okay, thank you, Krista. Okay, what I'd like to do is start with the number one problem that most people are having with the Baum feeder, and that is based on timing. The sheets actually getting from point A to point B without that sensor triggering some kind of NIP error. And most of the time, the people that are having trouble with the Baum feeder are having problems because of the way the paper is getting to the sensor right as it's entering the press. Most of that can be alleviated and eliminated by just looking at what may be causing those issues. The number one thing that I see in almost every shop that I go in is that I think people start to play around with the marble configuration because they're getting frustrated, they're having some issues, and they're trying to figure out what kind of marble configuration they can have that will allow that paper to feed better. And most of the places that I'm seeing, the marble configuration is really not helping. It's actually inducing the problems, and then you're fixing other things to compensate for the marble configuration not really being correct. So what I'd like to do, I want to talk about what I think is the ideal marble configuration, and I'm going to start first with the paper itself. I think what we're seeing is how your paper is being cut, what's going on with your paper. If your paper is actually, are you running predominantly a 13-inch sheet, or are you running a 14-inch sheet, or are you one that has to keep going back and forth between the 13 and 14? In a perfect world, it would be great if you either stuck with 13 or 14-inch, because the biggest pain in the neck is that switch back and forth from 13-inch to a 14-inch width. So let's go with the assumption right now that most people are running predominantly either a 13-inch sheet or a 14-inch sheet. So getting the width set up and getting that where it needs to be, one of the things that I see is when that paper's being cut, 26-inch is not so bad. But when people are going to the 30-inch paper or even longer than the 30-inch, the paper really does need to be trimmed really well. It needs to be back trimmed, and it needs to be exact in size. That will help tremendously. If the paper is not cut, if it's not back trimmed and not cut right, you're almost failing from the very beginning. So let's just assume now that we are doing that and the paper that we're using is in pretty good shape. Weight limit, we can go pretty light, but you really want to try to stick on the longer sheets to at least, I really think that 118 GSM is really about where you want to be minimum on that. And on the Baum, the maximum, you can go up pretty high. You can go to 350 GSM or even push it to an 18 or even a 20-point board. But there is some extra finesse involved in doing that. Your airflow is critical. Getting that airflow so that you are getting the right amount of sheets through there is critical, and your pile height block is critical. So getting your pile height where it needs to be is where I want to start. You bring the pile height, you got the paper in there that you're going to run, the width, you got everything set up the way you want to set it up. You need to make sure that that pile height block, that number one, you're inserting the low end of the pile height block, not the high end, in. And you want to make sure that you are it's just touching, not feeling resistance and not a huge gap, just touching when you slide it underneath. Otherwise, you may need to lower and bring it up or down. Now, I also recommend that you lower the paper feed, bring it back up, check it, and lower it again and bring it back up and check it again. and see if it stays the same or see if it requires minor adjustment. Once you're set there, the next thing really is making sure that your air is set up right, number one, for a 13-inch sheet or a 14-inch sheet. Those numbers, which is 3 and 4, would be located on that. There's a little panel right on the feeder that will tell you. Gauging that airflow, a lot of people want to send all this side air and blow all this air on it. Too much air is just as bad as not enough air. So if you, in my opinion, you want to have about an inch, at least 3/4 of an inch of that paper looking like it's got air going through it. A lot of people get it so that just the top 2 or 3 sheets are dancing really high and the rest of them aren't really moving. And what happens is that it'll feed okay for a little bit like that, and then it won't grab a sheet, and then you have a jam. I suggest trying to get a little bit more air in there and get your stack just a little bit more of those sheets, at least a ½ an inch of those sheets, so that you've got some air in between those. Now I want to quickly talk about the next thing, which is the marble configuration. So we talk about the marbles, and I'm going to say that in my personal opinion, almost every substrate, lightweight, all the way up to about 120-pound cover, you can use the default marble configuration, which is really only 4 metal marbles. The rest are plastic. So in the position of 2, 3, 5, and 8. 2, 3, 5, and 8 is where you want your metal marbles. Everywhere else on there should have a plastic marble. That marble configuration, I personally have found that it works perfectly. Rarely do I need to change that marble configuration unless I'm going to a really heavy sheet. If your sheets have a lot of curl in it, or they're being cut down from some sheets that have been sitting in the warehouse and they've got a lot of wave and a lot of ripple, well, yes, there are times when you may need to mess around a little bit, but really the truth is this is, and I know that this isn't always as an operator in your hands or your control, but you shouldn't have to sit there and keep fighting with jam after jam after jam trying to get crappy paper to feed through that device. You're wasting more time and energy and aggravation than you are in saving by just cutting new paper down. I realize that's not always the case, but I do see a lot of people really chasing the bad quality paper, trying to get it to feed, and it just does not feed well. The next step down the line is making sure that your sensor, your exit sensor, is clean. That will get paper dust on it. So if you remove the kind of like oven door and lift that up, there's a sensor underneath there, and you want to occasionally blow some air on it or clean that, because that will get some buildup on it, and that will also give you a lot of those kinds of errors. These are all things that can be adjusted or may need to be adjusted depending on what your workflow is, the size sheet you're running, because now I'm back to timing again. Timing is critical. All of those things are going to assist and help you with the timing, but you also need to make sure that you have run paper feed timing at least in the last couple of months. And if you are running paper that is you know, a longer sheet, 27, 28, up 30 inches or longer, that you need to run paper feed timing for the long sheet feeder. There's a separate routine in there to do paper feed timing after you've done it for the whole machine, which requires it to be in the long sheet feeder as well, to do just that. And that requires a 20-inch sheet to do paper feed timing for the longer sheets. That routine is in the system, and I do not have the code for that, but that it is in there. If you go to paper feed timing, you will see for the longer sheets and specifically how to do it just for that feeder. That is critical in both of the, for both of those reasons. You also want to make sure that you've, at least recently, if you are running longer sheets, especially perfected longer sheets, you want to make sure that you are on top of your cross-track alignment and your skew. Because if that's off on your 19-inch sheet, it's going to be really off on a 30-inch sheet. So if you are running perfected sheets that are greater than 26 inches, you may find that you are having some registration issues or some front to back or some skew issues. So those are some things to think about. So at this point, I guess really